Welcome to Living the Smarter Science of Slim, where we provide a scientifically proven lifestyle for long-term health and fat loss by eating more and exercising less, but smarter.
Eat smarter, exercise smarter, live better. I am so ready for that.
Hey everyone, Jonathan Bailor here. So happy to bring you another bonus Smarter Science of Slim podcast. And today's show is definitely going to be a good one because we have a woman and a prolific writer for one of the most widely read websites in the world, about.com, and not just any member of the about.com editorial staff, but the guide to low-carb diets on about.com, a woman who has been writing and doing personal experimentation with a carbohydrate restriction or just being selective about the carbohydrates she puts in her body. I kind of hate that we call it a diet. She's just picking the best stuff. Her name is Laura Dolson. Laura, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Jonathan. It's great to be here.
Well, Laura, just to get us started, one of the things that really attracted me to you and wanting to have you on the show is I feel like a lot of the Smarter Science of Slim listeners will gain a lot from hearing your story from a personal side and both your successes and as well as challenges with taking a more deliberate approach to the types of carbohydrates you're eating. Can you just take us all the way back and tell us the story?
Wow. Well, I'm 58 years old, so that's quite far back that we're talking about.
Oh, we got some time. No, I'm just kidding.
Basically, I was always interested in fitness and health. I was a physical therapist in my first career incarnation, but I always had a weight problem. So I was always struggling with it and trying to figure out what were the best ways to deal with it. I came of age just at the Ansel Keys, let's all eat low fat, which unfortunately for me was the opposite of what my body really needed, but I didn't know that at the time. I went on many different diets and did the typical losing weight and gaining it back. And then I went through a period where I'd read the obesity literature and I saw how ineffective diets were. So I just stopped dieting and I did a lot of mindful eating kind of approaches and different kinds of methods to try to figure out why I overate. I sat in support groups for years where we tried to figure out why we ate those donuts, kind of thing. And through the years, I just kept gaining weight. No matter whether I dieted or whether I didn't diet, I gained weight, and I kept trying to I was a vegetarian for 12 years. I was a big advocate of the healthy whole grains and the low fat.
We all were at one point, so don't feel bad.
I mean, I was just, I was reading what everyone was saying to eat, and I kept trying to do that, and for some reason, it didn't really connect that, maybe the problem wasn't me, maybe the problem was that what they were suggesting wasn't right for me. Mm-hmm. And then a friend of mine in the mid-90s went on a low-carb diet, and it was actually the carbohydrate addicts diet, which is, I don't think anybody even knows about that one anymore, but it had been really helpful to her, and I just read her the Riot Act and told her how unhealthy that was. She should not do that. And she said, look, you're a science person. Go look, find the studies. Show me why this is so unhealthy. And I lived in San Diego at the time and went to the medical library at UC San Diego for like 3 days and looking up all the nutrition studies, all about low fat, which I was sure was going to show how healthy it was, and carbohydrate restriction and how bad that was going to be. And I came out of it saying, oh my gosh, there is nothing to show that eating low fat is healthier. Nothing. I could find nothing. And instead, indeed, carbohydrate restriction was really showing some promise. So I went on what I would call my first low-carb diet, I think about 1976, and that was kind of a zone type diet, so it was a moderate carb, but it really helped me. I lost a lot of weight. I felt better, or I lost a fair amount of weight, felt a lot better. But then I figured out that part of the reason I felt a lot better was that I was gluten intolerant. A friend of mine who's a pediatrician said, wait a minute, what were you eating? What were your symptoms? Oh my gosh, I bet you're, got celiac disease or are gluten intolerant. And it turned out to be true. So then I thought that was my problem. So then I started eating carbs again, just not gluten carbs. Mm-hmm. Guess what? Just about everything went back the way it was. I regained the weight, and all my symptoms that I was having reappeared. And I reached a point, I guess around 2000, that I just said, okay, this is just ridiculous. I was in the middle of menopause, and I was miserable from that, and I was pre-diabetic, and I was gaining weight, and I couldn't seem to stop it. And so I finally did this kind of program on myself where I spent a few months very carefully monitoring everything I ate and changing it. Like for this 2 weeks, I wouldn't eat dairy. For this, wouldn't eat, I just went through all kinds of different kind of permutations of eating and really charted my symptoms and my weight and everything. And finally, after 2 or 3 months, said, wow, I feel a lot better. And I realized, oh, I'm on the protein power diet. Okay, good, So then I became really firmly convinced that was the right way for me to eat, and then got very interested in learning more, reading more, and then started writing from there. I'd already done some health writing before that, mostly about cancer. But I turned my attention at that point to nutrition and particularly carbohydrate reduction.
Well, Laura, can you dig a little bit into, so after literally decades of trial and error, it sounds like you found a way of eating that's not a diet. I mean, you've been doing it for over 10 years now. It's just the way you eat. What are the characteristics? Like, what is your typical day look like? What is your typical carbohydrate intake? Is it really like a low carb, or is it more just like specific carb, or what are your thoughts?
It's low carb.
Okay.
Yeah. I eat a lot of vegetables. That's the vast majority of my carbs come from vegetables. I am a big believer in that. I go on JAGs, but for a long time I've been having a piece of my flax meal toast for breakfast with eggs, and I eat actually fairly high fiber diet. Mm-hmm. But I don't eat any grains. I don't eat any added sugar at all. Of course, I eat a little bit of fruit, a little bit of berries, but not a whole lot of fruit. It's just mostly protein, vegetables, nuts, some nuts, a little bit of fruit, some seeds.
Sounds like you've just gone sane. That's what it sounds.
I do eat some dairy. I eat dairy.
Yeah.
And so I'm not a non. Yeah, I didn't find that was helpful to me when I was doing my experiments about it. So yeah, I'll eat some cheese or whatever, butter, whatever.
Well, so Laura, are you looking at like between 50 and 75 grams of carbohydrate per day, or are you talking like low carb? I'm under 40 grams, always in a state of ketosis.
Say just because of the amount of vegetables I eat, I'm usually a little bit above that 40. I'm probably in the 40 to 60 range.
Okay. And you have found that what have you actually seen as the result, the long-term results, both in terms of your health and in terms of your energy levels and also your body composition?
Right. Well, my body composition is the bad news. I'm still definitely very overweight. The good news about my weight is it's stable. I lost, the kind of proverbial 10% of my body weight, and I gained a little bit of it back. And then it's been absolutely the same for 10 years. So year in, year out, I can depend on my summer clothes are going to fit. So to me, that's a success story for me because I was waiting. But it's kind of a taboo subject, Jonathan. I think people don't certainly the diet books aren't going to lead you to believe this result could be positive. People don't want to hear that, oh, this diet will just make me less fat. It's just not good news to most people. On the other hand, there is a lot of individual variation in what happens to people. And I think probably the older you get past menopause, I don't know all the ins and outs of why some people seem to take more weight off than others. But the health benefits for me have been fabulous. Not only do I feel a lot better, my concentration, my energy level, all of that, but my prediabetes hasn't progressed, which everybody said it would. All the doctors said, oh, you would be diabetic by now if you weren't low carb, really. My blood lipids are great. My blood pressure is great. All of those kind of markers are really healthy. I saw an endocrinologist who said, you're doing great. He said my life expectancy was as good as anybody else's. So to me, that's a huge success story. But when people look at me, they don't think I'm a success story.
Laura, I think you hit the nail on the head, and it breaks my heart because getting back to your story, you said a phrase, which you're certainly not the only person who said this. In fact, when I was speaking with Gary Taubes, he said the same thing, where I've always had a weight problem. Like, there are people, and it's not an opinion, right? I mean, this is now pretty much established in the scientific literature that 40 to 75% of our body composition has a heavy, heavy, heavy genetic predisposition.
Right.
So if you take an individual who is genetically predisposed to carrying more fat on their body, and you age them many decades, and you take them through menopause, and they are still incredibly healthy and just, I mean, they're not on the cover of any magazine, but that's not everyone's goal. That is, and they're happy, and they're not hungry, and they're healthy. And especially in our culture, I consider that a raging success.
Well, thank you.
Well, I mean, seriously, Laura, I mean, I think that's part of the problem is sometimes, like, let's be, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you are, at this point, I would imagine, since you've done this for nearly a decade, you're not struggling with it. Like, you wake up, you eat, you go about your life. Like, eating, and do correct me if I'm wrong, eating is not something you're really, like, worried about and focus a lot of attention on. Would that be fair?
Right. Oh, yeah. This is just the way I eat. When I'm hungry, I eat something, and then I'm not hungry.
So the reason I draw that distinction out is because for someone who is naturally heavier, to be in an unnatural state, aka to be quote unquote skinny, is probably going to require them to do a bunch of unnatural things.
I'm really glad to hear you say that, because I have the same impression. When I see people that are operating at what I think is probably below the weight their body wants to be, it takes a tremendous amount of effort. I mean, really,
Absolutely.
It's a full-time job for them. They're exercising many hours a day. They're obsessed with what they eat. I mean, really, they need to be like not working full time.
Oh, Laura, well, no, Laura, you're exactly, and that's, I mean, why is that? That's because they're battling against their basic biology. Their biology says, I think you should have this body composition. And it is a full-time job. Just like if you want to think of it almost as making your body have the ability to run unnaturally fast. Like, you can do that, and if you have a genetic predisposition to be fast, it'll be a lot easier. But even if you don't have a genetic predisposition to be fast, you can do that, but you're going to have to sleep more, you're going to have to change your diet. Like, anytime you try to take your body out of its normal homeostatic range, man, that's a 24/7, 365 job right there.
Right. Yes. And I've known people like that. And, if that's the way they want to spend their energy, okay. But I have a lot of other things I want to spend my energy on. Absolutely.
Well, and no one's, to be clear, if your health is in place and your self-esteem is in place and your energy levels are in place, isn't that really, and you're enjoying life?
Absolutely.
I feel sometimes that we conflate being skinny with the emotion that we think skinny will give to us. Like if you are in a state of serenity with your body and with your lifestyle, which it sounds like you are, and you're healthy, because health isn't subjective. Like it's not good to be diabetic. Like that's not good. We should try to not be diabetic. But if you've achieved that state of serenity with your appearance and you are healthy, you have achieved that which most people think they have to spend 20 hours a week on, or else they can't feel that way. So like, good for you, right? I mean,
well, thanks. I do feel that way, but I have sometimes a little bit of difficulty putting that message out.
Absolutely.
Because nobody wants to hear it, basically.
Yeah.
But when I do, from time to time, I get a good response. So I'm actually thinking of writing more about this because there are a lot of people in my situation.
Oh, absolutely. And Laura, I can't, I mean, it truly is. There's, I think what Gary uses the funny analogy of trying to make like what is it? Like a bulldog versus a dash hound. Like there's different, you ain't going to ever run a bulldog enough to turn it into a dash hound. Like it's just a different genetic makeup of that type of dog versus a different type of dog. And there's tall people and short people, and there's endomorphs, mesomorphs, and ectomorphs. Like that's not controversial. Those three body types have been an established medical standard for quite some time now. So to tell an endomorph, and for folks who aren't familiar with that, an endomorph is someone who's naturally heavier, mesomorph is in the middle, and ectomorph is someone who's a little bit lankier. Telling an endomorph that they can become an ectomorph is false. It is a full-time job, and even then, an endomorph will not become an ectomorph. They will be constantly battling their body's desire to keep them at a heavier weight day in and day out, day in and day out.
Well, and I think that's true. And I think there's another thing too, and that is that as people have gone through their lives eating the wrong stuff, it could be that we're epigenetically flipping switches that are more likely to, even if we started out maybe a little bit thinner, I can't really categorize it, but somebody who's now for 30 years been eating the wrong way, and now they found the right way to eat, they've lost some weight, but they may never go back to where they were. And, I look at, I went to the Ancestral Health Symposium, not this past year, but the year before when it was in LA, and there was a real difference between the low-carb people that were there, who tended to be middle-aged, older, fatter, and the kind of the paleo people who were young and athletic and running around. And some of the paleo people commented on that. And I think they said, well, low carb, that looks like it makes you fat. When in truth, I think people tend to come to the paleo movement young, and hopefully they never will have the problems that those of us who have eaten the wrong way for a long time have come to, and then we have to kind of come to low carb or paleo or whatever later in life. And it's not, some people, I know people that have lost a lot of weight and kept it off with low carb, but I know an awful lot of people who haven't. And I don't think that, like we were just talking about, I don't think that is a fault of low carb or a fault of them. It's just whatever has happened in their body in those 30 years has just made it more difficult.
Laura, your intuition is spot on. We talk about the set point weight and the weight that the body is trying to maintain. And one of the reasons I get so amped up about the consumption and distribution, especially to children, of processed starches and sweets is like Coca-Cola will have us to lead us to believe it's only 140 calories.
Right.
But that, like, what these edible products do to us is better characterized like what cigarette smoking does to our respiratory system. These foods do to our metabolic system, meaning they are causing irreparable damage. And that is not controversial. Let me give one example. We cannot get rid of fat cells. It is impossible. Once you have a fat cell, it always exists on your body. You can dehydrate it, but it's always there. Do you think it's easier or harder for someone who has more fat cells to gain weight than someone who has less fat cells?
Right.
So it is, you are spot on that if you lived through the Wonder Bread era, if you lived through the Ansel Keys era, sadly, that's like living through the Mad Men era for smoking. Like, yeah. It kind of stinks. The good news is we do have this prescription called carbohydrate restriction, which can elicit some damage control to the systems you need to propagate your life, which is really great. Like this is not a death sentence, but it also might not mean we're able to get on the cover of any magazines anytime soon, at least not fitness magazines. Certainly plenty of other magazines, but maybe not fitness magazines.
Right, exactly.
Well, and Laura, the other key thing I want to that you mentioned, which I think is so important, and the Ancestral Health Symposium story is a fascinating one, where I do think there is whatever lifestyle one chooses to follow, that is secondary or that is primary. The low carb lifestyle you are following is secondary. Like, it is not a focus of yours. If an individual is paleo and their entire life is predicated around finding certain qualities of foods and doing CrossFit 5 days a week and yada, 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 like, if that person put that amount of effort into really any kind of dietary program, they would probably get fantastic results. The question is, which strategy provides the most results for every given level of effort? What do you think?
Wow. So let me try to make sure I'm understanding what you're asking. You're saying, so paleo is not just a way of eating; it's obviously a lifestyle. And you're saying if it takes so much effort for people to figure out what to eat and do all the exercise and really the sleeping. I mean, there's a lot to it that's really great. I'm not.
Yeah, oh no. And
I don't want to make it sound negative at all.
Yeah, and I don't mean to cut you off, but my message was definitely not.
Right.
Anything negative about paleo. It was more, forget about paleo. Just like I don't care, vegetarianism. Like, if you take any form of eating, like if you take person A and they have diet approach A and they are dedicating 20 hours a week to that. Right. And you take person B and they have diet approach B and they're dedicating 2 hours a week to it. Like, there's two factors varying there, not just the type of diet they're eating.
Absolutely. And the other thing that goes along with that is once you go from eating a junky diet to eating a healthy diet, and although people might disagree with some aspects of what that healthy diet is, you're most of the way there without going to a lot of the time-consuming detail.
Exactly. Yeah, there's definitely an 80-20. You eliminate edible products from your food.
Yeah.
I mean, that we're not suffering from a diabetes epidemic because people are eating too many potatoes, right? It's the edible products and garbage, and certainly some people would probably be better off staying away from the potatoes, but people ate potatoes long before we had 40 million children under the age of 5 who were overweight, right?
Right. Yeah, the amount of course, the amount of, and not just the amount of processed food that's being eaten, but, as is coming out lately with Michael Moss's book and so forth, the amount of care and attention that has been plowed into making sure that people want to keep eating that stuff is part of, a big piece of the problem, I think. If it was just like the thing about a potato is it's just a potato. It's not, it hasn't been coated with, the exact right combination of chemicals to make you want to keep eating it.
Oh, absolutely. And even deeper than that, Laura, I mean, that's spot on. Is a lot of people don't realize that, for example, an apple that you buy at the conventional grocery store compared to like an apple you'd pick off a tree in some forest in some remote land are complete. I mean, people like Dr. William Davis's book Wheat Belly, right, is just flying off the shelves, and it's phenomenal. And it's great because it basically says, yeah, people want to say, well, in biblical times, people ate wheat and they didn't have all these problems. Well, yeah, they were not eating the same wheat we're eating today. Like, they're two different foods. Literally, if you look at the fructose content in the typical apple you would buy at a grocery store and the fructose content of an apple of our Paleolithic ancestors, or like, they're different foods. One has been engineered over generations to be sweeter and higher in fructose. And so we're getting it from all angles.
Yeah, and even going back, you don't even have to go back that far. I mean, I did a few years ago, I went back and looked at, there was charts from the 1950s, and the difference between the amount of sugar in a cantaloupe in 1950 and in 2000 was significantly, it it was more in 2000.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they've just been breeding them a lot recently, even to be sweeter and sweeter. Of course, is the big goal.
And it gets so tough, Laura, I think, because you'll have individuals who, given that, let's call it like second layer of food engineering, where you're eating a food, you're not eating an edible product, but the food has been bastardized in some way. So you've got individuals who are like, okay, I'm going to start eating more food. And they do things like they have a snack, which is a big banana. So there's 35 grams of sugar right there. And they have some peanut butter, because they're like, peanut butter is good for me, but it's the kind that you typically buy that has a bunch of trans fats in it. But they're like, well, it's peanut butter, so it's natural.
And sugar.
And sugar, right? So, and then that doesn't work at all. So they're like, well, forget this. I'm just going to go back to my Twinkies and O's, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So it's almost like you need that level deeper almost, which is certainly not easy. But when you find that, like you have, and you're able to find what I like to call nutritional and psychological serenity, because at this point you're healthy, you're happy, you're not hungry, you're not worried about it. I mean, in some ways, Laura, you've got a leg up on me, because I am worried about what I look like. You know? So I'm like, oh man, I'm coming out with this other book. I got to look good, or no one's gonna buy my book. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, I mean, I don't in my daily life have any self-consciousness, but it's true that when I meet a bunch of people who have a different expectation of what I'm going to look like, I do get a little like, oh boy, here we go.
Laura, I think we may have hit on something here where you could be the champion of. It's almost like a survivor movement. I mean, I don't mean to get like too like mushy, but individuals who, like maybe survived a disease or something like that. In some ways, those recommendations we were given for a couple decades was a pretty plague-like disease. And not only did you survive it, but now you're thriving in spite of it. I mean, let's get a ribbon for that. Hell, I think so.
Well, you have a very positive outlook on it, and I really appreciate it. Because I would like to spread that idea. Because I think it's true for so many people, and the real tragedy for me is I see people giving up because they say it quote unquote didn't work because it didn't bring them to the weight they expected to get to, and that just breaks my heart because they were getting so many benefits, but they give up on the whole thing. Yeah. And that I would love to do something to educate people so that they would stick with what they have found to be healthy for them, regardless of the weight they end up at.
Absolutely. Please, listeners, if you yourself or anyone you know, please do not sacrifice unquestionable internal benefits because they may not manifest themselves externally the way the media would have us believe they should. Because that's a baby with the bathwater if I've ever seen it.
Yep, totally agree.
Well, Laura, this is just, I'm like, oh my gosh, we've been talking for quite some, we're going to have you back on the show. I feel like we could talk for quite some time. So I really, really appreciate you sharing your story and really opening up the book of Laura Dolson with us today. It was a wonderful story. I enjoyed it very much.
Well, I'm glad. Thanks so much for having me. I was really glad to do it.
Oh, well, thank you. And folks, if you want to learn more about Laura, she's not hard to find. Like I said, she is the low carb guide on one of the world's leading websites, about.com. And her name again is Laura, Laura Dolson, Dolson. So just type in Laura Dolson and about.com, and I am sure your favorite search engine will get you where you need to be. Laura, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's been great.
Well, and everyone, I hope you enjoyed our conversation. And remember, this week and every week after, eat more and exercise less, but do that smarter. Talk to you soon.
Wait, don't stop listening yet. If you like the podcast and if there's other ways we can help you, please join us in the Smarter Science of Slim support group, which is freely available at the Smarter Science of Slim website, smarterscienceofslim.com. There you'll find all kinds of free recipes and success stories and just all kinds of fun stuff like how to help your kids go sane and just great community content.
And just one last thing before you go, if you wouldn't mind heading over to iTunes and up onto Amazon.com and leaving us a review, and then going over to Facebook and liking us, we would hugely appreciate it.